Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Real History. I am your host, History Professor Jared Frederick. Before we take a look at today's episode, we once again invite you to click those like and subscribe buttons, leave a comment below, be sure to visit our t-shirt store, and also explore our website that has all sorts of wonderful educational resources available. And in this episode, we are going to be examining the 2003 Gary Ross film entitled Seabiscuit. Many people consider this to be a feel-good drama set during the stark years of the Great Depression, but how does it rate in regard to historical accuracy? As always, that's what we're going to be delving into. So without further ado, let's go ahead and revisit Seabiscuit.
It was the beginning and the end of imagination, all at the same time.
One of my favorite aspects about this movie is the Ken Burns-style documentary elements narrated by the great David McCullough, no less. I think these incorporate some very rich contextual elements without being too corny or trying to introduce unnecessary subplots. Additionally, I think these asides are useful interpretive tools to demonstrate how Seabiscuit is presented as something analogous to the plight of Americans during the Great Depression. It is an underdog story, after all.
It's a Stanley steamer, the boiler blew. Oh, can you fix it?
Much like the Wright brothers, Charles Howard had his beginnings in the bicycle business and opened a repair shop in San Francisco around the turn of the century. And the part here where a well-dressed gent with a horseless carriage shows up at his door, by and large, matches the reality of the historical situation. There simply weren't many auto mechanics at the advent of this industry, and bicycle experts seemed like logical helpers, I suppose. But by the way, why don't we have a movie yet about the Wright brothers? I think somebody needs to adapt the David McCullough book on that. But anyway, Howard wiggled his way into the corporate hierarchy of the automotive industry and was running Buick distribution in the San Francisco area before he reached the age of 30. But he apparently didn't meet great success until the aftermath of the San Francisco earthquake, which took place in 1906. And a saving grace for him was that he employed his surviving automobiles in the aftermath of that earthquake to serve as a rescue wagon for people who were in need. That was apparently a marketing coup, and he also cashed in on the insurance money to rebuild his business anew. So it was a new day for Charles Howard. Tom Smith was an old cavalry trainer and wrangler who was very much down on his luck during the first half of the 1930s. He was residing in a horse stall at a Mexican racetrack while training a horse named O'Reilly. But as luck would have it, his stallmate was training horses for a good friend of Charles Howard. And it was through these mutual connections that Smith was eventually brought onto Howard's team. Unlike what we see in the film, his hiring wasn't prompted by Howard personally witnessing Smith's horse whispering.
There were no suicides on Wall Street that day. It was a myth that would grow over time.
It's probably the history professor in me, but these montages, I think, are so effective because they remind me of the many conversations I've had with people who survived the Great Depression. There are these certain universal elements of uncertainty and darkness, but there's also a degree of unanimity as people are going through this collective suffering and attempting to survive. And the fact that 1/5 of the country is unemployed, 100,000 people were losing their jobs on a weekly basis, a sixth of the country was facing starvation at the worst moments of the Depression. All of these are numbers that we shouldn't soon forget.
You have a gift. You have a gift.
Oh, go with him. He's gonna take care of his. Oh, it's okay. Go with him.
The family dynamics and professional backgrounds of Red Pollard are slightly blurred here for the sake of underscoring just how badly the Depression was hurting folks. Pollard was a learned young man who was both quick with his wits and on his feet, but in reality, his family had lost their factory years prior to the Great Depression, not as a result of the Great Depression. Additionally, a family friend accompanied him as he set out to become a teenage jockey, though from what I understand, that guardian did abandon him as their travels were underway. And so Pollard was, in fact, on his own for a spell.
No, Bill, I'm not going to do it. No more layoffs. Well, it can't get any worse. Look, if it stays like this, Bill, we'll be fine. Really, we will.
I was unable to find in any period newspapers to what extent Howard did or didn't lay off workers during the Great Depression, but it's certainly a conversation that nonetheless underscores the specter of unemployment during this time period. This is all part of a vicious cycle in the labor and consumer realms, and it goes something like this. Markets crash, consumer spending stops, manufacturing jobs are lost, families can't be provided for, homes foreclose, people are evicted, and citizens become refugees in their own country. These were the harsh realities of the Great Depression, and the movie On and Off reflects on these themes. But something else worth pointing out here is that this also isn't the first time Jeff Bridges has played an automotive titan. You have to check out the 1988 Francis Ford Coppola movie entitled Tucker, where Jeff Bridges plays the title character, Preston Tucker, who is an automotive maverick who has all these grandiose designs for his automobiles during the World War II era. Perhaps that'll be another one that we check out on a future episode. Howard's 15-year-old son Frankie was indeed killed in a tragic accident after the vehicle plummeted into a canyon after he tried to avert a boulder. And Howard thereafter established a California hospital named in his son's honor. But one key thing that the film omits here is that Howard actually had 3 other children, and they're left out of the film entirely, probably to emphasize the character's sense of loss and isolation. The boxing scene reminds me of yet another period piece set during the Great Depression, and that is Ron Howard's Cinderella Man, starring Russell Crowe, which I think is likewise a really great depiction of life during the 1930s. I also find it somewhat strange that this really dark chapter in American history is often used as a backdrop for these feel-good underdog sports stories of redemption. There's Cinderella Man, there's Seabiscuit, there's The Boys in the Boat, and so on and so forth. The Depression is a great setting, I suppose, for such tales because these characters are already down on their luck. They've already struck rock bottom. There's only one way to go up from here, hopefully.
You could find anything: food, companionship, decent gin, and with gambling outlawed as well, the chance to turn bad luck into good.
So Tijuana witnessed a massive surge in U.S. tourists during Prohibition because it became the new boomtown capital for drinkers from across the border who wished to skirt the law. And in fact, in 1924, immigration officials imposed a 9 p.m. and later a 6 p.m. curfew for U.S. citizens to recross the border. And if they didn't make it in time, they had to spend the night in Mexico. So the modern paradox here is that one of the first border control efforts was not to thwart the smuggling of people or goods, but to deter tourists from heading to Tijuana, where they played with vice and sin and whatnot. So a very fascinating historical dynamic here.
That's Charles Howard.
Yeah.
I thought he came down here for a
Quickie divorce?
Why?
Look at him. Nothing quick about that.
Howard was more than double the age of his second wife, actress Marcela Zabala. And actually, she was also the older sister of his daughter-in-law, which I suspect might have been a bit awkward at family gatherings, since his son's sister-in-law thus became his stepmom as well. But anyway, that's neither here or there. As the movie shows, Howard did indeed meet her at the Tijuana races, and they married in 1932. And I suspect this must have reinvigorated his life, because 2 years later, he invested in the construction of the Santa Anita racetrack with his friend and business partner, somebody that you've probably heard of before, Bing Crosby.
The first time he saw Seabiscuit, the colt was walking through the fog at 5 in the morning. He was hurting, too. There was a limp in his walk, a wheezing when he breathed.
Seabiscuit actually did have a rough start at the outset of his career, losing his first 17 races. And from what I understand, horses were raced more frequently than today. And throughout his life, Seabiscuit won 33 out of 89 contests that he competed in.
Just because we're littler doesn't mean we're scared.
You hear that, Mr. Riddle? You have an appointment with destiny, a date with...
Unfortunately, Tick-Tock McLaughlin, wonderfully played here by William H. Macy, is a composite character. But I think we can assume that there are traces of Walter Winchell and Jim Healy in his performance. But all this said, he certainly encapsulates that style of bravado and theatricality that we associate with broadcasters from the 1930s and the 1940s. But that's not the only fact that is being fiddled with here, because the film also merges races and timelines, and it heaps the biscuit into handicaps that he, in fact, never participated in.
Where's the horse?
Signing autographs.
There you go, Max. Let it dry for a minute before you try to sell.
These are some great scenes with him stamping his signature onto paper as mementos. I wasn't able to find any evidence from the era of Seabiscuit stamping his so-called autograph, but it surely does make an amusing component of the storyline here.
What do you mean? He is a great horse.
We don't know that yet.
He's won 6 stakes in a row.
This is a great horse.
This public relations tug-of-war between the owners of War Admiral and Seabiscuit is one of the ways in which tension is sustained as the plot develops, I think. But it seemed that logistics and health were some of the primary factors that actually prevented the two horses from squaring off sooner. Multiple races were scratched due to poor weather and injuries that both horses sustained. But one thing that the film absolutely gets right is how War Admiral towered over Seabiscuit. War Admiral was more than 8 foot taller than our hero here in the film.
He lied to us. You want a jockey who lies to us?
What do you mean?
He can't see. He's blind in one eye.
In her book, Laura Hillenbrand noted that Pollard never actually admitted he was blind in one eye because his career, in essence, would be over if he had told the truth. He instead told Howard and Smith that he had become stuck on the rail and that he was unable to rebound during this particular race. So, yeah, he kind of did lie to them.
Look at us. Our horse is too small, our jockey is too big, our trainer is too old, and I'm too dumb to know the difference. Yeah, you think they want to race us instead of running away?
This sort of language was certainly not an exaggeration in the script. 1930s newspaper articles on Seabiscuit repeatedly categorized him as an underdog. Thousands of search results came up when I started going through the periodicals of the era. And those sorts of descriptions were undoubtedly hyped up by the Howard team to build enthusiasm and appeal among the masses.
Most of the damage was restricted to his leg. How bad is it? God, I don't know. It's shattered. 11, 12 breaks, something like that. We're going to have to operate.
Here's another example where timelines are merged or condensed. In reality, Pollard was not injured right before the big race, but in February 1938 when he was nearly trampled in a pile-up at the San Carlos Handicap and not breaking in a horse for an old boss as we see here. Something else worth mentioning connected with that is that Red actually married the nurse who oversaw his recovery following the accident. That might have been a really interesting subplot to incorporate, but what do I know?
He needs a good warm-up, so take him out slow. When you do ask him, just flick it twice, show him it's there. He'll know it's time.
Right.
Pollard's stand-in for the famous November 1st, 1938 race was the great George Wolfe, who is performed here by the equally notable real-life equestrian Gary Stevens. But actually, this was the 9th occasion Wolfe had taken Seabiscuit out of the gate, and the excitement here was palpable. I could very much sense this by reading through the period newspapers of the time. There were nearly 3 times the maximum capacity of fans, more than what could be accommodated here, and 10,000 of the viewers had to be placed in the infield as a result. And some of the interesting background story behind this production is that to create or recreate this spectacle, the filmmakers used 4,000 extras, and even more interestingly, 7,000 inflatable dummies took the stands. And I think it looks pretty convincing. It's an interesting alternative to using CGI. But another rather intriguing challenge was the fact that the horses used in the film apparently didn't know they were in a movie, and they had a natural inclination to race. And consequently, the horse standing in as War Admiral won several of these filmed sequences.
Put a splint on him just to keep him immobilized, but right now he's totally lame. He's not going to race again.
Cinematically, the movie is a good emotional roller coaster of highs and lows, much like racing itself, I suppose. The veterinarian here offers a very grim prognostication about Seabiscuit's fate, but in reality, the injury was not deemed irreversible or potentially fatal. And all in all, it became a waiting game to see if the horse could, in fact, heal. And ultimately, he did. But where's the suspense in that? After falling in love in the hospital and returning to racing, perhaps the biggest moment in Pollard's career, and maybe Seabiscuit's too, came at this climactic moment in the film, the 1940 Santa Anita Handicap. Unfortunately, this episode in the film is where the movie really parts ways with the facts of the race once more for dramatic suspense. Here we see the Biscuit begin at a terrible pace, but he miraculously catches up as the momentum builds. But in reality, Seabiscuit was never more than a spot or two from the lead. He ultimately pulls ahead and gains the purse, though, of over $120,000, which is quite the pretty penny in 1940. And Pollard later called this moment the greatest ride I ever got from the greatest horse that ever lived. And matching this moment of majesty, I think, is the superb cinematography that we see in this movie. It begs the question, how many angles can you film a horse race from? And they just got so creative and so technically astute with this movie, and I think it pays off in really big dividends. And I believe Roger Ebert said that this was one of the great technical merits of the film as well. Historically, though, as an interesting side point, another question emerged in newspapers the day after the race. Did the runner-up, a horse by the name of Kayak 2, who was ridden by another rider by the name of Buddy Haas, did Haas throw the race to Seabiscuit? That was something that people were wondering in the newspapers at the time. And as it turns out, Kayak was also owned by Howard. Seabiscuit was a definite favorite in the public eye, and so it's a scenario that has been pondered by race fans in the many decades since. A very intriguing question. It's a very gratifying ending, and it is so well presented, and even the end titles are, I think, very tastefully and artistically well done. As I watch all this, I think that despite some of the liberties that were taken, I find Seabiscuit to be a very satisfying movie that accurately captures a lot of the flavor, the heartache, and also the hope that we often associate with the 1930s. Director Gary Ross did a fine job with this film, and he's also directed the Civil War drama Free State of Jones, which we've also analyzed here on Real History. And I wish that the same sort of material culture dedication had been committed to that film as thoroughly as it was to this film, Seabiscuit. But regardless, we examine a whole lot of war movies here on Real History, and this is a nice change of pace, looking at something a little bit loftier and more uplifting. And we certainly hope that you agree. Thank you once again for joining us on Real History. Before you leave, if you haven't done so already, please click those like and subscribe buttons below. Leave a comment, check out our t-shirt store, and explore our website with all sorts of wonderful educational resources. We hope that you have enjoyed this historical review of Seabiscuit, and we look forward to seeing you next time here on Real History. And until then, stay curious.